we'll start with this. Well, this morning, a lot of news is pouring in involving a lot of fights that are on the horizon. Some of them may happen, some of them may not happen. I'll leave such judgments up to you.
Okay.
But Michael Benson tweeted, major fights the WBC ordered today. Gennady Golovkin versus Jermall Charlo, Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter 2, Gary Russell versus Leo Santa Cruz, Jorge Linares versus Adrian Broner, Mikey Garcia versus Luke Campbell, Anthony Durrell versus Avni Yildirim, and Julian Williams versus Arislandi Lara. So let's talk about some of these fights. Let's talk about some of these situations. What's likelier to happen than not? Because immediately when I saw some of these fights, I figured that, one, there's more going on here than meets the eye. That's the most obvious thing. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking that right now too. That there's more going on here than meets the eye, and that some of these fights really aren't very likely to happen given all the other news involving some of these names. Now, the first fight that caught my attention, obviously, was at the top of the list. Gennady Golovkin versus Jermall Charlo. What's wrong with this fight, and why is this fight being ordered instead of a fight between Jermall and Canelo? Well, this is just one man's opinion. I figured that now that Canelo is the WBC champion, the WBC is going to play nice. They're not going to try to force him into any situations that he doesn't want to be in. You understand? And with most of the reports involving Canelo in his next fight, which could be going down as soon as December, with most of those reports tabbing David Lemieux as Canelo's next opponent, and David Lemieux being co-promoted by Golden Boy, it seemed kind of obvious that Canelo is more likely to face David Lemieux than he is to face Jermall Charlo. What's wrong with that? Well, yes, David Lemieux is the WBA's mandatory challenger to Canelo's newly obtained WBA title. He is a mandatory challenger, but what's the problem? David Lemieux's only been the mandatory challenger since last month.
Okay.
Whereas Jermall Charlo's been the mandatory challenger for the WBC title since August of last year.
July, actually.
Jermall Charlo is an outstanding mandatory. And the question then becomes a question that I've asked many times. When is Jermall Charlo going to get a shot at that title?
Never.
He did what he had to do to get in position for the title shot, and the WBC doesn't seem to want to do their job. This is more of the ethical ambiguity that they've become synonymous with, that sometimes they want to do their job, and other times they don't. This is one of the instances where it doesn't seem like they want to do their job, and what they are doing is using Gennady Golovkin as a shield for Canelo Alvarez. They're putting Gennady Golovkin in front of Jermall Charlo when really the fight that they should be ordering is the fight between Jermall and Canelo. What exactly is the logic that's being employed by the WBC in this instance? Doesn't make a lot of sense. We already know who the mandatory challenger is, and we already know who the champion is. It's another episode of the WBC bending their rules and bending their will for the marquee fighter, as we all expect them to. I mean, it's to that point where, ahead of this order, I said I don't think for a second the WBC is going to put their foot down when it comes to ordering that fight.
Hell no.
No, Canelo Alvarez has got the belt, and they're not going to, they're going to try to play nice. They're going to try to stay on his good side. And the only way they can do that is by not forcing him into situations that he doesn't want to be in.
Like this one.
That in mind, I figured they're not going to order that Charlo fight, even if he is the mandatory. They will find a way to circumvent their own rules.
Per usual.
To accommodate the marquee fighter, and it appears that that's very much what they have done here.
Yet again.
Now, outside of Canelo and just looking at two combatants involved, potential combatants, I don't know that Gennady Golovkin is in, any kind of hurry to have a fight like that.
Why not?
Abel Sanchez said this guy's not fighting for the rest of the year, and I don't know that his first fight of 2019, I don't know that they want that to be Jermall Charlo. I don't know that Gennady Golovkin, Team Golovkin, are going to comply with this order because, well, the WBC doesn't have any leverage to use against them. Remember, Golovkin's not the champion anymore, so if he says, fuck you and fuck your order, well, WBC's just got to eat that.
Fuck y'all gonna
Maybe
do.
Golovkin decides to challenge the winner of Saunders-Andrade.
WBO.
Maybe Golovkin decides to challenge the winner of Jacobs versus Derevyanchenko.
IBF.
One thing's for sure, and it's that neither of these two guys have to abide by this order. Now, I can see a scenario where Jermall might want the fight because Gennady Golovkin is a big name, and Jermall wants to fight the big names. So it makes sense that Jermall might want the fight more than Golovkin, but if you're a Gennady Golovkin, and you're feeling raw about the decision the judges came to in your last fight, if you're him, you might want to get your hands, on a world title. You might want to get back that luster, and you're not going to get that fighting Jermall Charlo.
For no title.
So I'm not sure that this is an order that Golovkin will comply with. Now, I'll say this much. For all the people months ago who were saying that Golovkin was depriving Jermall Charlo of a title shot.
He wasn't.
No, he wasn't. Golovkin wasn't depriving him of a title shot at all. Jermall Charlo willfully stepped aside to let the Canelo Alvarez Golovkin fights become a reality. He stepped aside. He chose to step aside. No one deprived him of the opportunity. But this here, right now he is being deprived of an opportunity. He is.
Think about it.
That title shot, it should be going to Jermall Charlo and not David Lemieux, because I reiterate, David Lemieux only became the WBA's mandatory last month, whereas Jermall Charlo's been the mandatory challenger since August of last year. So if you want to cry and complain that Charlo's getting a raw deal, you can complain to Canelo and you can complain to the WBC. Moving on. Interesting enough, the WBC, for some reason, thinks they have power, or the power, to order a Sean Porter versus Keith Thurman rematch.
Do they?
I'm not sure how this works because, Keith Thurman's not the WBC champion, thus he's not subject to your mandates. He's not he's not one of your champions. He's not ranked in your top 10 because he's not just, he's not some contender. He is a champion.
WBA.
So I don't even understand how or why the WBC thinks they can order that rematch, but it's there nonetheless. And I'll say this much as far as these two fights, Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter and Gennady Golovkin versus Jermall Charlo, both of those fights are good fights. I'm not complaining about those fights themselves. If those fights were to come off, they are good fights. They are aesthetically pleasing fights. They are. The thing is, I don't know how likely those fights are to happen because Keith Thurman doesn't have to listen to y'all. Y'all don't have no power over him. Same applies to Gennady Golovkin. You don't have any power over him either. So, I don't even understand that second fight, and I don't understand why they think that they can order a champion with a rival organization to do what they tell him to do. I don't even understand that. Gary Russell versus Leo Santa Cruz. A very similar situation to the situation between Keith Thurman and Sean Porter. Gary holds the full version of the WBC title, and Leo Santa Cruz holds the full version of the WBA and a lesser version of the WBC title, the WBC Diamond Belt.
What?
And maybe this is the leverage, I gather, that the WBC is trying to use against Leo to force him into a fight with Gary Russell. Now, once again, this is a great fight. I would like to see this fight come off. I would. I think it would be a very aesthetically pleasing fight, and it would be a unification fight. And the winner would have a great argument to be ranked amongst the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. It's that kind of a fight. But I reiterate, you don't really have leverage over Leo Santa Cruz.
They don't.
He doesn't hold the full version of your title, and he's not ranked as a contender. So you mandating a fight between him and your full champion, Gary Russell Jr., he might comply with it, he might not. But if he doesn't, there are really no consequences for him. What are you gonna do? You're gonna take away the diamond belt? Ooh, that's not a full version of a title anyway. He's already got a full version of a title, the WBA title. Essentially, it's the same kind of situation as the Keith Thurman and Sean Porter rematch mandate.
You have no power.
Keith don't have to listen to y'all. He could say, hey, fuck out of here. I'm gonna tune up with somebody. Fuck out of here. And essentially, Leo could say the same thing. He could. It's just, I don't really understand why they would go as far as ordering something like this when they've got to know. If me and you know, then they've got to know.
Yeah, I know.
You don't really have leverage over either Leo Santa Cruz or Keith Thurman. The next fight is the Jorge Linares versus Adrian Broner fight, a fight that I don't even view as being very likely to come off because Adrian Broner and his name is being tabbed to either face Floyd Mayweather in a tune-up fight ahead of what could be a Pacquiao rematch, or Manny Pacquiao himself. There are rumors circulating right now that Adrian Broner in his next fight, he might face Floyd or he might face Manny. So when you've got those kinds of options on the table, if the rumors are true, if the story checks out, if you've got those two guys on the table, you ain't gonna be worried about fighting no fucking Jorge Linares for what? What are you fighting for?
These nuts.
The next fight is the Mikey Garcia versus Luke Campbell fight. And this is yet another fight that I don't view as being very likely to happen. Why, you ask? Because we already know who Mikey Garcia is fighting next. He's fighting Richard Comney in defense of his IBF world title. This is his mandatory challenger. That news broke yesterday. So you've got to put your thinking cap on for this one. If Mikey Garcia fights and defeats Richard Comney, which some people feel is likely, if he wins that fight, he's got the option of unifying with Vasyl Lomachenko, which is a much bigger and much better fight for the fans and the organizations. He's got that option. Or he could continue on his suicide mission to 147 and face Errol Spence. If you ask Richard Schaefer, that's the fight everybody wants to see, and people seem hell-bent on making it, even though I think it's a bad idea. But where does that leave Luke Campbell? I'll tell you where it leaves him. It leaves him in the cold. Essentially, we know at minimum Mikey's facing Richard Comney next, but after that, it's an open book. He could face Vasyl Lomachenko. He could face Errol Spence. So I don't view the Luke Campbell fight as being very likely either. Now, the Anthony Dirrell versus Avni Yildirim fight, I think that fight will come off. I think that Anthony Dirrell will view Avni Yildirim as an opportunistic opponent that he can, it's a winnable fight for him. So that fight I do view as being a fight that will get made. And the second fight is the Julian Williams versus Erislandy Lara fight. First thing I'll say is, it's not a bad fight, but this is not a fight. If you're not a fan of chess players, if you're not a fan of strategists, cerebral fighters, then you won't like this fight. You won't. You've got two guys who are going to be trying to pick their spots. Two guys that may be trying to fight a cerebral fight the night of the fight. That doesn't really make for a lot of action. And the other potential hindrance that this fight has is we know that some time ago the WBA ordered Jarrett Hurd to give Erislandy Lara a rematch. We don't know that they're going to follow through on that. We don't know. But if you're Erislandy Lara, you've got two options then. If they do decide to follow through. You can either challenge Jarrett Hurd for the title that he took from you, or fight Julian Williams.
For what?
Use your head. Pretty obvious what the obvious choice would be in that scenario. The only thing is, that hinges on whether or not the WBA follows through. We haven't heard much word from them in regards to that. Jarrett Hurd, he was out injured, and he's being rumored to be potentially fighting on the undercard for the Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder heavyweight title fight. A lot of things are in the air when it comes to Jarrett Hurd, and even more things are in the air when it comes to Erislandy Lara. We don't know. But to surmise this entire list of mandated fights, you got maybe about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fights that the WBC has ordered, and only about 2 of them have a genuine possibility of happening. Only 2 of them. And that's really the last 2. So while some people might be looking at this news and thinking, oh my God, don't hold your breath for some of these fights to happen. Quite a few of them might not happen. And in other WBC news, WBC junior middleweight champion Eva Pietrzkowska will be returning to the ring on November 10th against an opponent that has yet to be announced. And she's coming off that victory over Maria Lindberg, a fight that I viewed as a very risky fight, it being that Eva Pietrzkowska hadn't fought in a while. And Maria Lindberg, she's a naturally bigger girl than Eva. Eva might be taller. She might be the more statuesque fighter. But Maria Lindberg was the naturally bigger, stockier, and heavier-handed fighter. And Eva Pietrzkowska fought like a champion. I was very pleased with her performance in that fight. A fight that I viewed as a fight that could be a bit of a banana peel. Could be dangerous. But she showed up and she showed out like the champion that she is. So
Ahead of this news,
Eva Pietrzkowska definitely seems to have her juices flowing, and I look forward to finding out who she will be defending that title against. Stay tuned. And also, going down in November, on November 30th, the domestic clash between Jeff the Hornet Horn and Anthony the Man Mundine will be going down. Okay, now this is a fight that has been rumored for some months. And, this fight is more intriguing than it seems. The reason for that is age may favor Jeff Horn, because he's the significantly younger man in this fight. I mean, Anthony Mundine, when you talk about getting long in the tooth,
30 and Mundine's 43.
This guy would have to be a woolly mammoth, you understand? Anthony Mundine is very much the older fighter in the fight, but the thing is, styles make fights. And it just so happens that Jeff Horn has a very physical style. So what happens when you've got a physical style and you're facing a physically bigger opponent? Anthony Mundine is the bigger man here, and he's accustomed to dealing with far bigger guys than little old Jeff Horn. But, time is on Jeff's side. He is the younger man. And that's the intrigue here. That's the mystery. That's the X factor involving this fight. Throughout Jeff Horn's short career, he hasn't yet had to face somebody who's naturally bigger than he is. And since Jeff isn't a cerebral fighter, he's not a chess player, he's not a finesse fighter, you have to wonder what's gonna happen. Will the size of Anthony Mundine catch up to Jeff, or will Father Time catch up to Anthony Mundine? We'll talk more about this fight as the fight date approaches.